that was when we see what I shall say a cigar-shaped object hovering in front of us. Inside were 3 figures.
Yes, they had like a cockpit in the cabin was in the front of the cigar-shaped thing.
At around 9 p.m. on November the 14th, 1976, near the city of Winchester, Hampshire, England, Joyce Bowles, 42, and friend Ted Pratt, 58, were driving a familiar route to the small village of Chilcombe to pick up a son. It was a trip that Joyce had made many times. All of a sudden she saw 2 lights. One was higher than the other. She nudged Ted to get his attention. The lights were coming from a bright orange-red object about 40 feet long and was flying at about 800 feet high, around a quarter of a mile away. The lights were bobbing information above a field and then slipped out of view behind some trees. As the car drove closer, what Joyce and Ted did not realize was that this wouldn't be the first incident they would encounter. Joyce drove a car around a sharp bend on the narrow King's Lane and slowed to about 20 miles an hour due to the curves and the darkness. Then, without warning, the car began to violently shudder and lurched to the right towards the shoulder of the road. Joyce then felt a heaviness in the air, as if some unseen force were pressing down on the vehicle as it veered off the tarmac and onto the grass verge at the side of the road. Instinctively, Joyce lifted her foot off the accelerator, but the engine continued to roar wildly. As the car ran into the grassy verge, Ted lunged at the steering wheel to help avert a crash with the trees ahead. Then he reached over and switched off the ignition in an effort to stop the engine racing. Joyce and Ted felt as if the vehicle was momentarily weightless or gliding. It was as though the car was floating sideways onto the verge before coming to a rest. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the jolt and motion ceased and the car abruptly stopped in the middle of the grass verge. Fortunately, not against a tree or a ditch they had initially feared. It felt like they'd hit an invisible barrier that slowed and halted with a gentle impact. The couple were now sitting inside the stalled vehicle, wondering what had just happened, and then looked up through the windscreen and saw a bright object directly in front of them. Hovering just above the ground was a glowing cigar-shaped craft, about 15 feet long, that hung about 18 inches off the grass. It was emitting a bright orange light that bathed the roadside with an eerie glow, and it was extremely close to them. Next to the hovering cigar, they could see what looked like 3 large bow windows brightly lit from within, and through the windows they could see the heads and shoulders of 3 humanoid figures. They were seated one behind the other, like on a bus. They had what looked like a cockpit in the cabin, and as the pair watched in dismay, trying to come to terms at what they were seeing, they noticed the misty-like vapour swirling beneath the object. The underside of the craft seemed to be releasing a glowing gas. Ted likened it to 4 jets blowing out gases from underneath, and looked as if the object was being supported by the columns of vapour. The craft itself was silent, apart from their own nervous breathing, and there was a strange stillness. Then things became even more bizarre when they became aware of a being moving outside the craft, and it was approaching them. Neither of them had seen a door open on the cigar-shaped craft. The being appeared to have passed through the side of the object without any visible opening, as though the solid hull of the craft offered no obstacle to its occupant. The figure had suddenly appeared and stepped forward in the darkness between the craft and the car, and walked like any human on 2 legs towards the driver's side of the car. Joyce sat frozen in disbelief as it came into the beam of the car's headlights. It looked human in shape, a male figure, about 6 feet tall. It was dressed in a silvery metallic-like material from neck to feet, with no headgear. His hair was long and blonde, down to his shoulders. He had a dark beard, and his eyes were a piercing pink light without pupils or irises. Joyce compared the eyes to those of a rabbit, pink as if reflecting red light in the dark. He put his arm on the roof of the car and looked in. He stared at Joyce and then Ted before looking at the dashboard. Then Joyce and the being locked eyes, where Joyce felt terror wash over her at the sight of his uncanny gaze and horrible expression. At that instant, the car's engines suddenly came back to life, where the headlights were now many times brighter than normal. It was like a surge of energy had coursed through the vehicle at the being's command. The couple realized that they were face to face with something not of this earth. As Joyce pulled away from the window in fear, Ted found himself feeling unexpectedly calm, and the panic and chest pains he might have expected never came. He gazed back at the strange being with an almost serene acceptance. The being induced a sense of peace in him. For about 2 minutes, the strange scenario continued between Joyce, Ted, and the mysterious humanoid. Then, just as abruptly as it arrived, the figure walked away without a word or any form of communication towards the rear of the car. Joyce feared that he might try to enter on the passenger side and was prepared for the worst. And when Ted looked over his shoulder, the figure had vanished along with the hovering craft. The couple took a few moments to compose themselves and tell each other that they had both witnessed the same amazing thing. As Joyce attempted to drive away, she found the car wouldn't move, and it felt as if the invisible barrier was holding it back. Joyce then turned the engine off for a few seconds and tried once more, and this time the car started, leaving them with a sense of relief that the encounter was over. They arrived back in Winchester at 9:25 p.m, although the whole episode felt like a lifetime. Later, Joyce Bowles and Ted Pratt gave detailed testimonies about what they'd encountered, which investigators painstakingly recorded. One of the first things that Joyce emphasised was the appearance of the UFO itself, that appeared fat and cigar-shaped, that was short and stubby, with a distinctly cylindrical form. The unusual propulsion of the object also came up, where Ted was particularly struck by what he saw under the craft with the downward-facing jets of gas. Other than the mist, Joyce wasn't quite sure how the object managed to stay in the air and remain silent. The description of the being looked just like a human who walked upright and moved naturally. The suit had a reflective quality that gave an illusion of rippling movement, even though the night air was still. There were no visible seams, fasteners, nor any kind of insignia on it. It seemed moulded onto the figure's body, smooth and featureless. The being, though human-like, wasn't dressed for any ordinary earthly task, and its face was pale and oddly striking, with a long sharp nose, a pointed beard, and shoulder-length blonde hair swept back from the brow, with inhuman pink eyes that lacked an iris or pupil. Both Joyce and Ted experienced lasting psychological effects from their close brush with the unknown, and in the hours, days and weeks following the incident. The Daily Mail newspaper conducted its own investigation, finding multiple people in the Winchester area who claimed to have seen an orange UFO in the sky on November 14, 1976. Learning of these reports bolstered Joyce and Ted's confidence that they weren't alone in seeing something so unusual. Joyce later reported that she'd received anonymous phone calls warning her to keep quiet about what she saw. On 2 occasions, not long after the incident, a man claimed to be from the government phoned her. He delivered a blunt message: do not speak about what happened. And when she tried to question him further or get his identity, he hung up. For weeks afterwards, her telephone line exhibited odd behaviour. Sometimes when she picked up the receiver to make a call, she would hear an engaged tone that wasn't clear. Even when nobody was on the line, it was as if someone was tapping the line. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. On May the 7th, 1989, it is claimed that the South African Air Force had shot down a UFO over the central Kalahari Desert. Apparently radar had been tracking the craft that had flown up from the Antarctic. When they arrived at the scene, they found the following: a crater of about 150 metres in diameter and around 12 metres in depth. Inside the crater was a silver-coloured disc-shaped object at a 45-degree angle embedded in the side of the crater. The collision had caused such intense heat that around the object the sand and rocks had fused together. There was an intense magnetic and radioactive environment around the object, so much so that it resulted in the failure of the Air Force equipment. It is also claimed that the UFO was relatively undamaged. It is also claimed that there were 3 occupants in the craft, where 2 of the aliens had survived the impact. The craft, along with the aliens, were then taken to a South African Air Force base. The terrain around where the object had struck was later filled with sand and rubble in an effort to disguise the event that had taken place. Within days, the craft and its occupants were transferred to the United States under tight security and apparently taken to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. The following statistics were then taken where the origin of the craft was unknown but was suspected to be extraterrestrial. There were no identifiable markings other than an insignia that had been forged into metal on the side of the craft. The following dimensions were as follows: approximately 18.28 metres in length, 8.68 metres in height, and weighing approximately 50,000 kilograms. The material the craft had been made of could not be identified. The outer surface of the object was a polished smooth silver colour with no visible seams on the outside or the inside. The perimeter showed 12 unevenly spaced, flush with outer surface oval-shaped portals. They were unable to determine its source of propulsion. They also located hydraulic-type landing gear that had been fully deployed and posited that an electronic malfunction had caused the object to crash, no doubt brought about by the Mirage jet firing a laser cannon at the craft. The 2 humanoid creatures that had survived the crash were described as being clothed in tight-fitting grey suits and were no doubt extraterrestrial in origin. Their height was approximately 137 centimetres, or about 4.5 feet tall, with a bluish-grey complexion. The texture of their skin was described as being smooth and extremely resilient, and were totally devoid of any bodily hair. Their head was oversized in relation to the human proportions, with a raised cranium area with dark blue markings extended around their head. They had prominent cheekbones, and their eyes were large and slanted upwards towards the side of their face. Their eyes had no pupils. The nose consisted of 2 small nostrils, and their mouth was just a small slit devoid of any lips, and they had a wide jaw compared to human proportions. They had no ears, and the neck was very thin compared to humans. Their arms were long and thin and reached just below their knees. Their hands consisted of only 3 digits that were webbed with claw-like nails, and their chest and abdomen were covered in scaly ribbed skin. They had small, narrow hips and short and thin legs. They had no exterior sexual organs, and their feet, like their hands, consisted of 3 toes that were also webbed, but they had no nails. They were unable to take any blood or tissue samples from the aliens due to them having an aggressive nature, which would have not been surprising considering their circumstances. When they were offered various types of foods, they refused to eat, the reason being that the food being offered was either unsuitable or their digestive system was totally different to ours. Because they did not appear to be able to physically talk, they could not work out how they were able to communicate, but suspected that they were possibly telepathic. In order to verify whether such a crash had actually taken place in the Kalahari Desert and was not some made-up fiction, a pilot of one of the jets was able to be tracked down. His name was Squadron Leader Goosen, and was based near Pretoria, the capital of South Africa. He said that he fired once at the UFO, which was enough to bring it down. However, in order to obtain further evidence that the incident in the desert had really taken place, the Office of Special Investigations at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base refused to verify or deny that a UFO had been recovered from the Kalahari Desert. 2 independent researchers, Dr. J.J. Hurtak, an American academic and professor of science, as well as the scientific director of an organization called Scientific Adventure Inc., and Baron von Butlara, a German researcher, conducted their own inquiries. Both came to the conclusion that a crash landing had indeed taken place in the Kalahari Desert. The incident was also confirmed by Dethoko Siso, Botswana's Environment Minister, in a 1993 report in a Cape Town daily newspaper called the Argus. The report also brought attention to the alleged cover-up and disinformation exercise coming from international forces. Researchers attempting to uncover the truth have been met with missing pieces of information. There was a female scientist who was working at the Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa at the time of the Kalahari Desert crash, who now lives in Europe, who claims to have been present at the hospital when an autopsy had been carried out on the third deceased alien body that had been recovered from the crash. She said that most pronounced difference between their life form and ours was that there was no obvious gender or reproductive organs and no immune system or digestive system. The description that she gave of the body was typical of the classic grey alien form, being small, smooth grey skin, no body hair, a large head with huge dark oval-shaped eyes. That everyone present at the autopsy were warned to keep quiet, and that she only felt safe disclosing what she witnessed because she no longer resided in South Africa. So, who are these grey alien beings, and could there be some sort of alien drone? It has taken more than 4 billion years for intelligent life to emerge by natural selection on Earth, but there are billions more years ahead in our planet's lifetime. Over that time, intelligence could develop in entirely new directions. These beings could be hundreds, even thousands, or even millions of years ahead of us. In 1 or 2 more centuries, we humans could be overtaken or transcended by inorganic intelligence. Are aliens more likely to be flesh and blood like us, or something more artificial? And if they are more like machines, what would they be like? When these crafts are seen and even followed in our skies, they're able to travel at amazing speeds before abruptly stopping and are able to change direction in an instant. If any human body were in a machine that was able to match their craft, our bodies would be turned to mush. How are their bodies able to withstand such strong G-forces? It is perhaps more likely that the aliens would be the remote electronic progeny of other organic creatures that existed long ago. Scientists still don't know whether the origin of life is rare and only happened here on Earth, and if life started elsewhere, then intelligence could have evolved in many varied ways. There are planetary systems out there that are at least 1 billion years older than our own, so it's possible that intelligence has already developed into something non-organic. Most of us live fairly routine lives with just the usual humdrum when nothing out of the ordinary ever happens, except for the occasional drama, and then everything goes back to normal. However, for some people, the reality is shaken when something appears out of the ordinary, something they're not meant to experience or see, and has them questioning everything they have ever believed in. The following 5 stories happened to people whose lives were never the same after their encounters with the unknown. Number 5, Christmas Humanoid. When I was about 12 years old, I was laying in bed on Christmas Eve. My bed was exactly opposite my large bedroom window, which gave me a view of the top of our property fence and a very large tree just beyond it. It was one of those weird nights where it seems to never get truly dark. The sky kept a red hue about it all night. I was past the age of major Christmas excitement, so fell asleep pretty normally. Suddenly I woke up and was fully alert. I was laying on my back, and when I opened my eyes, they met another set of eyes. Outside, sitting in the trees beyond the fence, was what I can only describe as a demon. Its eyes fully fixed on me and not moving. The eyes reminded me of a cat's, huge with elongated pupils, yellow and very iridescent. The body was not large, pretty lean, and dark scaly skin. It was sitting with its legs pulled up to its chest, kind of crouched. This visual has stayed with me so vividly for my entire life. Over 20 years have passed, and I can still see it like it was right in front of me. I felt terrified and threatened. We maintained eye contact for what felt like a very long time, and I don't remember breaking eye contact, saying anything, or seeing it move. It seemed like I just fell back to sleep at some point, but kind of doubt that that's how it really went. Sometimes I wonder whether it had hypnotized me. I woke up the next day and remembered it immediately. I just knew that it wasn't a dream. It was far too real. I didn't say anything to my parents at this point, as it was now Christmas Day, but I was sullen and it affected me greatly. Fast forward to the next Christmas Eve, and every Christmas Eve that followed up until about age 18, I fainted every single Christmas Eve for at least 5 years. Fainting was not something I typically did. It was scary in itself and always the same experience. I would feel the aura and would try to run away from it, but I fainted and heard symphony music and experienced a coma state where I could hear the people around me trying to help but couldn't react. Eventually, I couldn't keep this secret anymore. I was smart enough to make the connection that I saw this demon, and since then, I've fainted on the anniversary of it. I told my parents what I'd seen years ago, expecting them to say I was silly, crazy, dreaming. Instead, they met me stony-faced, and I got to hear their stories. To read their stories, we've attached the link below. Number 4, Mexican Gnome. I don't remember the story completely, but my grandpa once told us a tale about an experience he had whilst living on a small ranch in Mexico. He was with his older brother. I think my grandfather was about 12 or 14 at the time, and while he was with his brother out in the ranch, they heard something behind some bushes that he said sounded like singing. He and his brother both went to investigate, and when they looked behind the bush, they saw a couple of goblin-like creatures. Duende is what they call them in Mexico. They didn't see my grandfather or his brother, and his brother suggested that they both get out of there before they were seen. They returned home, and I don't think they ever saw them ever again. Number 3, the alien. I was around 5 and in bed struggling to fall asleep. My parents were in the living room up the hall, and I had my bedroom door open and with the hall light on to act as a sort of nightlight. I can remember tossing and turning and getting bored because I just wasn't tired, and I sat up, and there in the middle of my room is the silhouette of an alien. Thin body, huge head, and I could tell it was small because it was standing at eye level to me, sitting in bed. I couldn't see any features because of the light from the door behind the figure, but we stared at each other for what felt like ages. Very slowly, this thing moved close to me, lifting its arms, I can't remember which, and reached out as if to touch me. I remember blinking hard to see if I was dreaming, and when I opened my eyes, it was gone. Nothing there. I stayed sitting up in bed, listening for anything because I'm scared this thing is waiting for me in the hall. I had no fear at all when the whole experience was happening, but now I was terrified and sprinted up the hall to my parents, asking them who was in my room. I'm 23 now, and I don't remember much from that scary experience all those years ago. We moved house a while later. Funnily enough, the place we moved into had serious poltergeist problems, but I'll never forget seeing that figure in the middle of my room. Number 2, roof creature. I'm an 18-year-old male that has had 2 strange encounters in my life. The first was seeing a UFO, and the second is what I'm about to share here. It was around 1 a.m, and I was gaming on my PC. It was a weekend, so I didn't have to worry about waking up for school. I stood up from my desk and made my way to the bathroom. I did my usual business, but noticed that the window was open. It was a sliding window, and because I live in Australia, it also had a mosquito netting. It was pitch black outside, and during the day it had rained on and off, and the wind was picking up, so I thought I'd close the window in case it rained again. The window was located directly above the bathtub, so in order to reach it, I had to put one foot inside. This window always required a bit of an effort to close, so as I started to close it, it made its usual sound as it dragged against the frame. Now, before I get into the scary part, I have to explain the layout of the house. This was an old 2-story apartment complex, and outside under the window is a little roof overhanging which shields the back door. As soon as the window started to close, I heard 2 loud footsteps banging on the roof, and then for a split second I saw the silhouette of a black humanoid being go past the window as if it had jumped. I heard no landing sounds, but this was entirely possible since the fence to the left of the bathroom was about 2 meters away and had tall grass on the other side. Now, I know it was really dark, but I swear this wasn't a bird or a bat with its outstretched wings. It was definitely a humanoid shape, and much too large to be a possum. I instinctively jerked back out of the bathtub and ran into my parents' room screaming and woke them up. Now, this is a part that makes me feel sick in my stomach. My parents' curtains were open, which is normal for them, but this means that the creature would have been staring in at my sleeping parents and 3-year-old sister, since their window was rested slightly above the overhang previously mentioned. I don't know how I managed to sleep that night, and if this was truly an alien, then it was only a meter away from me through a wall and a window. Number 1. 3 humanoids. This happened in the middle of the night at my mum's house some years back in Northern California. I was asleep on the floor in the living room. Next to the living room is a room that could be seen through 2 large windows and French doors. We call it the middle room. Next to that was my mum and stepdad's bedroom. The light in the middle room was left on, partly dimmed at night. I woke up and saw 3 short grey aliens walking around in the middle room. They were about 5 feet tall, had long skinny arms. The arms stood out to me the most because how thin they were, with no muscle tone, like you would see in a human. The eyes looked solid black and were larger than a human's, though not as large as shown in some depictions. I don't remember much about the nose and mouth other than that the features were small and not noticeable. I don't remember any details about the hands. I partly sat up and just watched them, but had no energy to do anything else. They didn't seem to notice that I was watching them. Within a couple of minutes, I fell back to sleep. I'm guessing that they had somehow transmitted something to keep everyone asleep, but sometimes it doesn't always work 100%. Here's the kicker. In the morning, my mum walked in and said the aliens were there the night before. I then told her that I saw them too and asked how many there were and what they looked like. Her description matched what I had seen. She's had other alien encounters, but this was the only time there was a witness. Me.